Glass towers, clean lines, men in neat suits who never sweat. That was the public view. Wirecard gleamed like a promise you could quote in a speech. It was modern, efficient, unarguably German. It began in the late 1990s in seedier corners of the internet. Porn sites, online gambling. Merchant banks refused to touch. Someone had to collect the cash. Wirecard did. Quietly, efficiently, discreetly, profitably. People like profit. They forgive a lot to get it. Markus Braun entered the scene and changed the tone. Not a showman. A conductor. Clean hair, clean glasses, a wardrobe that said competence. Black turtlenecks, tidy statements, calm confidence. He stepped into the CEO chair and talked about rails, the pipes of money. Borders, old news, paper, ancient history. He sold a dream and people bought it. By the mid-2000s, Wirecard stopped being a niche processor and started becoming a future. Acquisitions, partnerships, licenses, slides with lines that climbed like skyscrapers. By 2018, the company sat in the DAX 30. It stood next to giants. The papers printed photos of Braun with ministers. Investors leaned forward. Germany cheered. If Braun sketched the blueprint, Marsalek built the set. Tall, affable, a man who carried himself like an answer to a question no one yet asked. A figure who moved with stealth and left no fingerprints. He loved theaters, of power and of performance. He spinned stories you couldn't confirm without getting on a plane. Trustees in Manila, he'd say, with a smile that made doubt look rude. Partners in Singapore, operations in the Gulf. He waved glossy documents. He hinted at intelligence contacts, at projects that sounded more like geopolitics than payments. People listened. Investors believed. Auditors smiled and took notes. The numbers looked great on paper. Asia, a sweet melody. Dubai, a bright chorus. Revenues rose in clean columns that begged to be trusted. But miracles are suspicious things when they happen overnight and nowhere local customers can be named. Short sellers watch with knives. Journalists smell sugar where it shouldn't be. In London, the Financial Times started to look. Dan McCrum and a handful of colleagues poked at addresses, called banks that supposedly held Wirecard cash, knocked on doors. They found mailboxes, rented desks, front companies that existed on paper and not in reality. Wirecard's reaction was fierce. Lawsuits, legal letters with heavy-duty language, PR storms, accuse the accuser, paint the questioners as predators, deny louder. The tactic worked a while. BaFin, Germany's regulator, raised its head and astonishingly investigated the journalists instead of the company. Short-selling bans followed. National pride wrapped itself around Wirecard like a blanket. Inside the company, the air changed. Where enthusiasm once filled corridors, a quieter pressure set in. People stopped asking questions openly. Whistleblowers learned the soft language of caution. Raise an eyebrow and your email might be archived. Raise a second one and you risked being moved on. A mid-level compliance officer in Singapore found a loop. Payments moved from A to B to C and back to A, dressed up as separate transactions. She flagged it. The note came back. Focus on growth, operations to follow. Promotion followed. Silence followed faster. Auditors have routines. They ask for confirmations. They ring banks. They get letters stamped and signed. This is the dull, mechanical hygiene that keeps finance from becoming fantasy. Every year, Ernst & Young, one of the world's most prestigious audit firms, signed off on Wirecard's accounts. And in the world of finance, an EY signature is gospel. So if the auditors said the books were fine, who was anyone else to argue? In 2019, confirmations began to smell off. Letters from partner banks arrived with letterheads that looked correct until someone looked closely. Phone numbers answered with polite confusion. "We do not have those accounts," a Philippine official told a caller who pressed too hard. The supposed trustee named in Wirecard's filings denied holding billions. He said he ran a small business. He sold umbrellas. Marsalek answered auditors with calm, theatrical patience. He had an explanation for the way cultures did banking in Asia. He offered mediated confirmation. He promised intermediaries with appropriate reputations. He smiled and charmed people into believing his bogus stories. But auditors kept asking for bank-to-bank confirmation. Direct. No intermediaries, it's a simple ask. It is how the world of numbers keeps faith with reality. Meanwhile, the Financial Times published. Not a whisper this time. Maps, names, a spreadsheet that looked like a scavenger hunt, round trips that created revenue out of thin air, subsidiaries billing one another for services that no one had provided. The story landed in inboxes, and a different kind of pressure began to move across trading desks. Markets are patient, but not forever. Share prices wobble, the faithful hold, the curious sell, the regulator comforts. Everyone performs their role. In Munich, a single memo circulated. "Remain calm," it said. "Calm is an act. Calm can be scheduled. Calm can be bought with words." But there are moments when a calm voice sounds like a dare. There are moments when a man in a turtleneck looks less like a visionary and more like a man counting on the kindness of his audience's disbelief. A late meeting took place in a windowless room. Water rings on coasters, legal counsel on one side, finance on the other, a speakerphone with the auditors on the line. The EY partner asked for the one thing that could end the argument: direct confirmation from the Philippine banks that held the trust accounts. Marsalek said the word culture and smiled. Braun said process and suggested patience. The auditor repeated the request. The line hummed. The silence lengthened like a fuse. "Tomorrow," someone said. "We'll have solutions tomorrow." The word floated and landed in the room like a lit match. What happens when the world asks to see the receipts? What happens when the lights shine into rooms that only know how to look good in shade? Something was about to give. When the cracks widened, they didn't just show numbers. They showed blood. Spring 2020. Wirecard was at its peak. Market value north of 20 billion euros. Politicians boasted of Germany's tech darling. Investors still clapped. But the auditors weren't clapping anymore. Ernst & Young drew a line in the sand. Enough explanations, enough intermediaries. Show us the cash, show us proof. The number was 1.9 billion euros, not loose change. The kind of some entire economies worry about. According to Wirecard, it sat safely in 2 Philippine banks held in trustee accounts. Simple, right? A phone call, a confirmation letter, a signature. The banks denied everything. No such money, no such accounts, no such fairy tale. And just like that, a 20 euros billion empire shuddered. Braun went on the offensive. He stood before cameras, cool in his black turtleneck, and spoke about attacks, conspiracies, unfounded allegations. He smiled like a man with cards still hidden, but behind the glass walls, panic rippled. Marsalek, the COO, was quieter, too quiet. He promised paperwork. He promised clarifications. Tomorrow, always tomorrow. June 18, 2020. Wirecard admitted it couldn't find the money. The hole wasn't a scratch, it was a canyon. Investors dumped shares. The price collapsed 60% in a single day. Braun resigned. Cameras caught him leaving headquarters with the stiff smile of a man who knows the jig is up, but just hasn't admitted it yet. The next day, German prosecutors arrested him on suspicion of market manipulation and fraud. It should have been the climax, but the real show was still to come. Marsalek vanished. One day he was there, Wirecard smooth-talking COO. The next, gone. A trail of flights, false leads, conflicting reports. Some swore he flew to Manila. Philippine immigration records showed his name, but investigators later called them fake entries. Others whispered he fled through Russia, shielded by contacts in intelligence circles he'd bragged about for years. Interpol issued a red notice. Europe searched. Marsalek was smoke. What does a man need to disappear? Passports, cash, friends, and high places. Marsalek had all three. Some say he had training with Russian special forces. Some say he carried files too sensitive to fall into Western hands. What no one can say, where he is now. Back in Munich, the picture sharpened. Wirecard wasn't a fintech miracle. It was a house of mirrors. Profits fabricated through third-party partners in Asia. Fake customers. Fake revenue. Phantom balances dressed up as assets. A decade-long fraud. The losses, billions. The victims. Pension funds, banks, regular people who thought they'd bought into the future. But the scandal wasn't just Wirecards, it was Germany. How had regulators missed it? Why had BaFin, instead of investigating Wirecard, hunted journalists and short sellers? Why had politicians defended the company as critics shouted fraud? The questions turned political. Hearings opened. Executives testified. Auditors sweated. A former finance minister's name was dragged through the mud. Everyone asked, was it incompetence or complicity? Meanwhile, Braun sat in custody. His defense, he was deceived. Marsalek was the mastermind. Wirecard was sound, only a few men went rogue. A familiar tune in financial scandals, blame the vanished man. But emails, memos, meeting minutes painted a harsher truth. Braun had signed off on numbers. He'd been warned. He'd pressed forward. He'd smiled for investors while the floor crumbled. Forensic accountants tore through the books. The fraud wasn't new. It stretched back over a decade. Inflated revenues, invented clients, layers of shell companies. It wasn't an accident. It was design. Their excuse, they were deceived by forged confirmations. A flimsy shield for a global firm. Class action suits followed, angry investors demanding to know why the watchdog barked but never bit. At the center, the 1.9 billion euros became more than missing money. It became a symbol, a reminder that trust can be engineered, sold, and cashed until it collapses. Marsalek remained the ghost in the story. Every few months, a rumor surfaced. He was seen in Moscow. He was working with mercenaries in Africa. He was alive, dangerous, untouchable. Each whisper kept the legend alive. And Wirecard? It went bankrupt. Germany's proud fintech star filed for insolvency. Employees scattered. Shareholders were ruined. The brand became a curse. But the scandal left scars bigger than balance sheets. It shook Europe's belief in its regulators. It embarrassed Germany on the world stage. It showed how far smoke and mirrors could go when backed by political convenience and national pride. And the unanswered questions still echo. How many knew? How deep did it run? And where is Jan Marsalek, the man who turned disappearance into his last, perfect illusion? Because sometimes, the only thing more dangerous than a criminal caught is the one who never gets found. The empire was dead, but the ghosts were restless. Markus Braun, the man in the black turtleneck, found himself behind bars. Prosecutors painted him as an architect of fraud, a CEO who signed off on lies year after year. His defense sang a different tune. He was the victim. Marsalek, the missing COO, had tricked him. He'd trusted the wrong man. It was a simple line, too simple. Investigators dug into years of emails, memos, board minutes. Braun had seen the holes. He'd signed off on the patchwork. Deceived doesn't sign a billion-dollar loan facility. Deceived doesn't tour investment roadshows. Germany's prosecutors were clear. This wasn't incompetence. This was conspiracy. Fraud on a scale the country had never witnessed. Meanwhile, regulators were burning. BaFin, the watchdog that had barked at journalists instead of fraudsters, found itself in the dock. Why had it banned short selling of Wirecard shares in 2019, effectively shielding the company? Why had it treated journalists as villains when they exposed the cracks? The answers weren't flattering. National pride, laziness, maybe worse. The fallout triggered a political storm. Hearings, committees, red faces in parliament. A finance minister forced to admit, yes, Germany's oversight had failed. Yes, the world had watched as Europe's largest corporate fraud unfolded in broad daylight. And it wasn't just regulators. Auditors at Ernst & Young had signed off on Wirecard's accounts for years. They'd nodded at fabricated bank statements, swallowed explanations, stamped balance sheets that didn't match reality. Investors sued. Billions in damages sought. EY claimed it was misled by sophisticated fraud. But courts don't forgive easily. The deeper the accountants dug, the uglier it got. Revenues invented. Subsidiaries that existed only on paper. Circular transactions designed to look like profits. A trail stretching back over a decade. a design nurtured by Braun, performed by Marsalek, and enabled by auditors who asked too few questions. And the victims, they weren't just hedge funds. Pensioners in Germany, teachers in Britain, banks in Japan, families saving for retirement, funds trusting Germany's crown jewel. Billions evaporated, lives quietly upended. One pensioner told a reporter, "They said it was safe. German, solid, I lost half my savings." That's the cruel poetry of fraud. It sells you certainty, then robs you blind. The prosecutors built their case brick by brick. Evidence showed Braun had known the balance sheets were fiction. Wire transfers to nowhere. Subsidiaries that only existed on paper. Fake merchant contracts. Circular deals designed to inflate revenues. Emails were read aloud in court. Internal memos displayed. Each one chipped away at Braun's claim of innocence. The defense clung to a lifeline, Marsalek. They argued the missing COO was the real architect. Braun, they said, was blindsided, betrayed by his most trusted lieutenant. It was a neat story, one villain to explain it all. But neat stories don't hold in the face of hard numbers. Forensic accountants laid it bare. Wirecard's business model had been rotten for years, long before the Philippines fantasy, long before Marsalek's vanishing act. This wasn't deception of one man. This was a company built on lies, nurtured by executives who knew exactly what they were signing. And then came the investors. Lawsuits piled up against EY, against BaFin, against the German state. The argument was simple: you let this happen, you signed off, you shielded the fraud, now pay. Billions in claims flooded courts across Europe. EY fought back, insisting it too had been deceived. But the tide was against them. Trust, once lost, doesn't come back. As the trial dragged on, Germany was forced to restructure its financial oversight. BaFin, once toothless, got new powers. The days of shrugging at balance sheets were over. Auditors faced stricter scrutiny. Listed companies faced tighter checks. Wirecard had forced a reckoning. But reforms couldn't erase the deeper wound: reputation. Germany had prided itself on engineering, reliability, Ordnung. Wirecard had exposed its soft underbelly. And still, the manhunt. Jan Marsalek, the ghost at the center. Interpol's red notice carried his name. Investigators traced whispers, flights into Minsk, meetings with Russian intelligence operatives, a villa near Moscow. Stories swirled that he had slipped into the orbit of Wagner mercenaries, a man trading secrets for safety. Each sighting was smoke, each lead turned cold. Some believed he was alive, untouchable under Russian protection. Others whispered darker endings, that he knew too much and was already buried in some unmarked grave. But in the absence of proof, Marsalek became myth, a living reminder that the truth of Wirecard would never be whole. The trial of Braun rolled into 2023, stretched on into 2024. Testimonies stacked. Media coverage surged. Every session pulled back another layer of the rot. And yet, the 1.9 billion euros was never found, because it was never real. It was a phantom, a hole dressed up as profit, an illusion that fooled banks, auditors, politicians, and ordinary investors alike. The fraud wasn't hiding in offshore accounts. The fraud was the company itself. When the verdicts finally came, the message was clear. Braun and his lieutenants weren't duped. They were the architects. Wirecard was not a victim of one man's scheme. It was a machine designed to deceive, and everyone at the top had their hands in the cookie jar. The sentences were heavy, but no prison term could match the damage done. Because fraud doesn't just destroy balance sheets. It corrodes trust. It poisons the faith people put in systems, in markets, in governments. And Wirecard's poison had traveled far. From pension funds in London to banks in Tokyo. From small investors in Munich to global institutions. What's left? A question. How could a 24 billion euros company, audited year after year, championed by politicians, applauded by investors, be nothing more than smokes and mirrors? The answer is simple. Fraud is easy when people want to believe. Wirecard wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet. It was a a German tech champion, a European rival to Silicon Valley, a miracle of modern finance. People bought the story. They wanted to. And that's the oldest con of all.